Mr. Keune, a very warm welcome back to the Aligned Founder podcast, this time the Bali edition. How are you feeling today?
Very good. Thank you.
I'm very excited for this round two of our previous conversation, which if you're just joining us, then it was definitely a spicy conversation we had before. I think the longest episode I've ever recorded was our last one.
Nice.
So let's see how long we go for today.
Sounds good.
What are you excited for today?
Realness and rawness. Two big things that were coming up for me in the past days. And it's kind of also my intention for that recording to explore that and be working with what is there.
Nice. Let's assume, just to kick off, that maybe someone is listening to this episode, they have no idea who you are, they haven't listened to anything about you or heard anything about you, who you are before. Maybe you'd like to give a little, very brief synopsis of who you are, and if they're curious after, they can go and find the other various podcast episodes you've been on to find out more.
Okay. Let me try to cut a very, very long story short. So, let's say for very long period of my life, I've been identify myself mainly as an entrepreneur, and that's also where I put lots of energy behind it. So it's basically building companies for 13 years now. Two that we actually say where it makes sense to speak about them. Like one was in the healthcare sector, a platform for the booking of doctor's appointments. Did that for 6 years, not really successful. Started another one which was in the e-commerce sector, and we were working with influencers, and we're building brands around cosmetics and food supplements. And that one, it's called Invincible Brands, became quite big. Went from 0 to 100 million of sales within like 5 years, and was exited to a big German FMCG company for 400 million, which brought me lots of business success and money, and left me pretty numb and empty emotionally, and not really fulfilled. So that's in a nutshell also the reason why we are here today.
Absolutely. And we talked about a lot of those business insights and lessons in the last podcast as well as some of the low moments. But I would say our last interview was, albeit very deep, it was more of a classic hero's journey story of that journey from going from where you grew up and the backstory. So I think if someone's interested in that, they can go listen to, I think it's episode 6 or 7 on this podcast. I think it's 6. But today we're going to take a slightly different route, because what's been happening in the meantime is there's been some other podcasts and media coming out, specifically the OMR podcast, which is quite a big show based in Hamburg in Germany, and there was quite a lot of attention. So ideally, I would like to, in this episode, go into some of the topics that won't be covered in that or in future episodes, that maybe people like to focus on, the big exit or, business success and this kind of things, which is, it maybe gets a lot of clicks and sells a lot.
Yeah.
But I would like to talk about some of the maybe more raw, edgy topics that lie behind that.
Sure.
And go a bit deeper into also your journey post finding breathwork, which is what brought us together and was kind of the culmination of our last conversation, which was about how we came together in Greece to do a 1-week retreat, and how that kind of changed the course of things after that big exit you just mentioned. So I suppose we can kind of pick up where we left off there.
Let's do that
and see where we go. So in our last conversation, we kind of explored how this mix of coaching and breathwork was something that was very powerful, that kind of came in and gave a new direction, and was maybe mixing these worlds of like understanding things with the mind with also feeling things in the body, and that allowed a lot of things to shift. So after we had our first kind of proper meeting together in Greece, and you went back to Germany, maybe you'd like to share a little bit about how that process was, because everyone loves to talk about the 0 to hero, the rags to riches, like everything was shit, now it's great. But what actually was the nitty gritty of that process of the last year and a half?
I'd love to share about that. And first of all, I would say it's a process that is still ongoing. I would love
You
to
mean you're
also.
not fully healed already?
No, and I personally don't believe in a final healing. It's a lifelong journey. So the question is
Sure.
like, is there a way to actually enjoy it? And for me, joy comes in when I get to really be myself. So it will be interesting our conversation to also look a bit at the past few weeks. There's some interesting bits and pieces. But anyways, going back to 2022, when I came back to Germany after our first session, so yeah, there were a couple of things that I kind of started to change about the way I live. A few were a bit easier to implement, a few were more difficult. So I'd say the first thing I realized and noticed was I had developed a bigger capacity to be with whatever is, and especially be with my emotions. And that helped me to face a few difficult decisions. So let's say there were already on Greece, I felt like I have some relationships, I've built some relationships that are actually not serving me, and where I don't feel like I'm seen for the person that I am, and they're actually kind of even kind of standing in the way of, let's say, my fullest expression, and actually, feeling deeply connected to people. So there were a few relationships I wanted to let go of, and I actually did that, got back, and in the most human, let's say, way that was available back then to me, I tried to explain to some people that I just don't want to be in a relationship with them anymore. That was definitely a big one for me. I've never done that before.
How was that received?
Mixed. Some people simply never replied to message. Some people expressed that this is sad but understandable. Yeah.
And how was that? How did that go? So you just would send like a text message or a voice note saying, "Hey, nice to know you."
Yeah. Actually, there's a part of me that, has a story I need to, let's say, meet and call and let's just like. But then also I had learned that it's important to me to be with whatever capacity I feel I have right now, and I don't need to always lean into all edges at the same time. And then I've chosen to send basically text message or voice message explaining why I'm at and why I'm not available for the relationship, which doesn't mean that it's not going to be available at a later point in time, but that's how I am right now.
Yeah.
What I would have done before is simply ghost people, not reply anymore. So I felt like being honest about what I'm available for is, for me, felt like the better way.
Yeah.
And I've chosen like voice message and text message as the way to communicate that. Yeah.
Has anyone ever sent you a message like that?
No.
How do you think you would have reacted a few years ago if you'd received a message like that?
I would definitely not reply. I would be, like a few years ago, I would have been angry at the person probably, but then kind of told myself a story that they're just fucked up and bad people, and had nothing to do with me.
Yes.
And in a funny way, it had nothing to do with the other person. It was about the way I want to relate with people. And I also what I try to do is to kind of speak for myself and not saying you are this or you are that and blah blah blah. Try and kind of sticking to my experience in that relationship. So anyways, I don't know if that was the best way of doing it, but it was a big change for me, kind of, let's say, bringing in some focus on, okay, what type of relationships do I want to have, and what I can say action steps to actually invite these relationships into life. And a part of that was to create space for deeper ones, more raw ones, and letting go of some that were not serving me actually.
Yeah.
So that was one thing that I did. And
were you aware of some of those relationships in the past? Like, of course, you said you got very clear when you were on that retreat, but were you aware that some of them maybe weren't serving you, but you were somehow just keeping them alive for justifying sake of just not wanting to hurt them? Or what was the main reason why you wouldn't have cut that off in the past, would you say?
A big fear of so I was pretty good in building relationships for, let's say, around I might need that person to, especially needs around finances, financial needs, potentially creating business. Like most of it had to do with business and money.
Yeah.
So we worked through that quite a lot on EOS as well. So then I felt like, okay, I can actually let go of something that's not serving me, because I'm not that much driven by fear around not having enough and needing people to do business with me to then have enough, basically.
Sure.
So that was actually the main thing. And I knew that I've built many great relationships in the time I was very active with business, and also had accumulated some that weren't serving me, and they were driven from a place of fear. I need that person to then do something with me, help me build something, whatever.
Yeah.
And I was able to, that was the main thing, actually.
Interesting. And then there's almost like a tolerating of them, even though maybe you're not like fully aligned.
Yeah.
From a place of fear, but then there's almost like maybe some resentment towards self of like, why am I still relating with this person?
Yeah.
It's not aligned, but also I'm scared if I get rid of it. So yeah. That's powerful.
Yeah, totally. That was big. And then, also it was pretty much for me the stopping of certain coping mechanisms, behaviors that I deep inside do not really want to be a part of my life, and I hadn't found a way out. So there were basically drugs like cocaine, there were porn, and there were sex workers.
Yeah.
So these three things I basically fully stopped after I came back to Germany. And
what do you think had prevented you from stopping that before?
Let's say there was stress induced by many things, but especially by not wanting to feel what is there, like an inability to be with what is. If I don't want to be with what is, then I did not want to be in my reality, because in the reality that I'm experiencing, the things that are there are there. So then I needed to find an escape from that present moment, because the present moment is too painful to be with it. So I need to escape from it.
Yeah.
And then these things I just named are perfect ways to get out of it. And then there are all sorts of other things, like, people can choose their addictions, shopping, social media, whatever. There's some just socially chocolate. Whatever, many different ways of being addicted to things that create a relief from the present moment and an escape from it, right? So my ability to actually be with what is had gone up. So I was able to stop these behaviors, which doesn't mean that these desires won't come up the moment there is a difficult moment or like difficult emotions that I do not want to feel. But it was the first time I actually stepped out of that and was able to see, okay, now there's like something difficult coming up. Okay, there's desire. Okay, I can choose differently. So, topic I want to speak about again later. But now, since we are in 2022, I would say like, it was the first time I was really able to step out of these things and needing them to actually soothe my experience and to make my life acceptable in a certain way. Does that make sense?
How would previous to that, just to understand the shift in how your experience of life was and now is, or what's closer to now? Because a lot of people like to think about using, willpower to get over some kind of habit or addiction, and then maybe not looking at like what's the source of that.
Yeah.
So my lens would be typically that there's some deeper discomfort or pain that our body or nervous system has learned, and it's just basically found whatever, like choose your escape route, basically. Like any of the things you just mentioned are just different escape routes that the body has learned. If A, then B. Yeah. If we feel this, then we must do this or we're going to die, basically. Yeah. So what would you say was the kind of blow by blow series of events, let's say 4 years ago, when you would feel this tension or stress or a need to escape come up? And then what would that go like now? What's different now in your experience?
So the number one thing I would turn to would be porn because that's basically available also during the day without having to, like, if I would turn to drugs or alcohol, but since I'm alcohol is a drug as well, but anyways, like,
Sure.
if I would turn to that during the day, that let's say brings down my ability to actually function and to run a business, right?
Yes,
so
sure.
My to-go thing would be porn. It would then escalate at some point into dates with sex workers. So actually real sex, not only watching it. And also like a desire to use drugs like alcohol, later on cocaine, to kind of not feel, but less on a like, no, I would say it's true, like it would kind of escalate in that way.
Yeah.
The easier a certain addiction is to be, let's say, be integrated into what is called like a normal life, the more I would use it, basically.
Yeah.
Right? Because I can still function and operate and do everything. So it gets kind of like how it was in the past, and then
just to understand on that, sorry to interrupt, like,
go ahead.
You're in your day-to-day, you're in running the business, something's happening, and then what do you notice? What's the urge of the story?
That's like a sense of, okay, that is too much. There's like an overwhelm based on the emotions that are present and like an immense stress. And actually it was never really the external stress, because I do believe I have quite a big capacity for handling things. Mm-hmm. It is more like the connection with what happened in the external and what emotion would come up for me internally, and then not being willing to feel that and to be with that, and then that would lead to a sense of overwhelm by all the stuff that would come up, and that then induced a desire to escape and release pressure, basically. And then afterwards there's like it's kind of like a soothing of the system. It's then
pacified.
Yeah, exactly. It's pacified. It's kind of like it's put somewhere else, and then I'm able to operate and function again in the world.
Yeah.
And before it would be at a point where I wouldn't be able to function anymore. So then something needs to happen to allow the overall system to be there and do the job, or be the partner, or whatever is required in that moment, right?
Yeah. So what I hear from that is like, it's almost like your system builds up and up and up like steam in the pot.
Yeah.
And then it's too much and it's going to explode. So you let a little bit of steam out.
Yeah.
And then it comes back to within regulation or within normal.
Exactly.
So how does that differ now? Because technically a lot of those mechanisms might still be available today. So how does your experience of like stress or overwhelm, how's that now?
Yeah, I mean, let's say, emotions do still come up, for sure. I'm still a human being, right? Didn't turn into a robot. I can say, like, to the breathwork, I became more human than before, right? So things do still come up. However, there are many things. Like, first of all, there is a capacity to see them, but not become the emotion, but I'd say I have a relationship to the emotion, but I'm not relating from the emotion. I'm not like becoming it. I'm having some awareness for it. Sometimes stuff can obviously still be overwhelming. So if, let's say, just sitting with something won't work because things are becoming too big and too intense, and stress needs to go somewhere. So by now I have a few techniques around bringing myself into the body, and that, because most of the stuff, like, it's the mind that doesn't want to go there, but then the body doesn't really care. So I have a few things I can do to kind of bring myself into the body, and also some techniques that I've developed around breathworks that do help me. If it's like really too intense, I also go into like a journey and kind of express fully, and to then let go of things, basically. I'd say these are main things.
So it sounds like almost retraining the body instead of reaching for an external thing to regulate it, that you now have more tools and trust in your own body to regulate itself.
Yeah. Yes, totally. And I've just, and maybe it's a little too early to speak about it, but I feel like I want to share it here. Mm-hmm. What I just discovered recently is that a real game changer is developing a relationship to these desires. So what I did for some part of the journey was like, okay, I see a desire coming up, for example, desire to watch porn. Then I would say, no, you're wrong. You shouldn't be here because now I'm supposed to do breathwork or do meditation or do whatever. That works to a certain extent, but then the thing which is the suppression makes it even a bigger desire.
Yeah.
So then what worked extremely well for me was to look at it and say, okay, like, how do I want to relate to you? Do I like tell you to go away and do I hate it? Or do I say, hey, I can welcome you in? So if that's what I need right now, then you are welcome. That's fine. Like, and with that, the moment I allow myself to these desires to be with me and to actually create the potential to act them out, the moment I did that, they kind of left.
Like they're playing hard to get.
Yeah.
As soon as they know they can have you, then it's like, fuck, this is boring.
And it comes back a bit to what you said about discipline, right? A certain way I started to apply like also discipline to now live a different life and to be different and not have these behaviors. And that's discipline is useful and it helps to a certain extent. Mm-hmm. And then I think for me, the next step is to really have a healthy relationship to these desires and to welcome all parts and takes the risk that they might take over and I might act on them. By taking that risk, I become so aware of what's happening that I might not even do it.
Yeah.
That was a big step for me. And I would still say that that's something that I kind of worked on for the past weeks and is fresh for me. Mm-hmm. So let's say back to 2022, I was really using awareness and breath to release stress in a different way and to not having to turn to these behaviors.
Yeah.
And starting that relationship. And now I feel like it's kind of, I'm taking it to a new level where I'm actually working with them.
Yeah, nice. There's almost like this spectrum, which is like on the right side, we've got chaos.
Yeah.
Which is like chaotic. Everything's flying around. There's no order. So in order to bring order to chaos, we need control.
Yeah.
And the control works to bring order to the chaos, but only so far. And then ultimately where we want to get to is on the left side, which is flow.
Yeah.
So that's where it can all be there. But because there's a grounding in some basis of control, then we know that we can always return to that if we need.
Yeah.
So, it's kind of like learning the rules to then break the rules.
Yeah.
But if you never learn the rules, then you're just making it up.
Exactly.
So,
yeah, exactly.
Super interesting. Sounds like quite a process.
Yeah, totally. And
so what would you say then to someone, let's say there's someone listening to this who, is a high performing entrepreneur, maybe lives with a lot of stress and maybe likes to or finds himself dabbling in something like porn or some addictions that they know aren't good for them, but they're kind of like, fuck, what do I do about it? Like I tried to give that up, but it's hard. What would you say to that?
Couple of things. One is I'd always say, choose your battles. Like don't take a lot of them at the same time. Going to be difficult. Unless you had like a big experience like in a retreat with like breath work or something else and you feel like, I have the capacity to actually stop, then for sure go for it. But let's say I personally do feel pressure from all these movements of like stop porn, stop drinking, stop drugs, stop this, all of these things. Like I feel pressure by that. And that creates self-judgment within me. Yeah. So if that someone feels that, then I would say, okay, first of all, choose your battles, choose one thing after the other. Because these things are there for a reason. They're there to release stress. And if I'm an entrepreneur and working like a high stress environment and I take away all my soothing mechanisms, that's not going to last longer than 3 days. It's just no chance.
Yeah.
Unless I have learned a new way to deal with them. Okay. Then the second thing would be kind of like check in and see, okay, what's my relationship to these things? Do I judge myself? And do I actually think these things are wrong? And then a trick that I kind of came across was to allow myself to feel these things and to have these desires, and maybe choose one that is not damaging. So, for example, one could choose porn, for example. Say, okay, like I have a couple of things that are really like not great for my health, and maybe even it's like it was in my case, hurtful behavior. I'm cheating on my partner, whatever.
Yeah.
Maybe you want to choose something that doesn't create that much damage to allow myself to have that desire and maybe even act on it from a place of not from a place of shame, like I do that, but then I feel ashamed, and then I get, and then I need to soothe the shame and do more of it, and even more shame. It's just like a vicious circle.
Yeah.
But I can change my relationship to and say, okay, I do feel a desire to watch porn. Okay, and I allow myself to do that because I need that stress release, and I'm working hard. I'm so responsible for so many things, for whatever, like so many people in the company and all these demands. I take a moment to allow myself to escape my reality, and I do that through porn.
Yeah.
And maybe I do that like many times. But that gives me the chance to see through the illusion of what it is, and I can actually see, it's actually not helping me to really move away from these things, from stress. And it's actually it's not helping me to feel great, and it's not helping me to feel empowered and to be strong.
Yeah.
But then I can let go of it and actually find something from a place of, I found something that is being more effective, rather from a place of shame. So I think that was big for me.
Yeah.
Honestly, I did exactly that. At some point on the journey, I was like, yeah, I get it. Like I have that idea now. I'm different, an improved person and whatever, and I still have to decide to watch porn. You know what? I just go fucking do it.
Yeah.
And I went full on it, and I was like, man, it's not serving me at all. It's just fucked up. My mind says, oh, I want that. And my body said, no, fuck it. Like, don't touch me again. Like, it's enough. And my mind wanted more of it. And that was kind of a little bit of a breakthrough for me also, where I said like, that desire is not even healthy. My body doesn't even want it. So now I can choose something else from a different place. But before I was still kind of in this shame cycle.
Yeah.
So that would be another thing, if that's available for someone to kind of look into it. And obviously, I also want to say that it's maybe not such a good idea to do that with drugs, then go full in, and like maybe that it can be damaging. So choose something that is, where the damage is limited.
Also because on, let's say, like a bender of sorts, it's not just one thing, there's other things, and you're kind of on a downward spiral.
Yeah, exactly. But that experience then can be transferred to the other areas that may be more damaging. Maybe it's not a good idea to go into full allowance basically of doing it. So say a core message that's important for me would also be to and that was very important in our works that we did when I kind of like opened up about these things, and I felt the first time that there's a space where I do not need to feel ashamed for these things, and they are there for a reason, and not they are bad, and that creates a place of self-compassion, and from there I can change. I would even say it's almost impossible to change from a place of I need to suppress something. This is wrong. There's shame. And it won't work.
I need to present myself as this person.
It won't work.
And that behavior doesn't align with this image I've created of myself. For myself.
Yeah.
Not even for others, but also for others.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I think when you were speaking, the one thing that came up was this idea of self-compassion, which sounds very, kind of soft for a lot of people, but that really is the special sauce. Yeah. It's like, and I think in areas like basically what you're speaking to shame is this feeling of like, oh, I'm wrong or bad for doing or wanting this. And to have someone come in and just like accept that and be like, they basically break the cycle and be like, hey, actually you're okay for wanting to watch porn. Like that's totally fine. I totally get it.
Yeah.
And probably that inside voice is like, no, fuck you, you don't get it, And then, but once there's like a little gap, then the light can get through. Yeah. And then it creates the opportunity, I think, for ourselves to also, as you said, have that compassion where it comes up. And instead of it being this drill sergeant that used to say, work harder, bitch, you need to make money. Now it's saying, stop watching porn, bitch. You know what I mean? It actually is, it's then like replaced by a more supportive version of like, hey, if you want to do it, great, but also that's not going to serve you. But like whatever you choose, I support,
Yes.
And then ultimately we're empowered to make whatever decision is most serving.
Yeah, totally. And I'd also say to that entrepreneurs that's maybe seeking for support, there are like way more people than I had assumed that, let's say, are dealing with these addictive behaviors. So let's say within the capacity that feels available and safe, opening up to maybe a good friend or ideally maybe also to a coach or someone to work with can already be the first step out of it. And there are way more people dealing with that than society wants to admit.
Absolutely. Although you're certainly doing a good job in breaking that stigma from our recent interviews that have been coming out. So tell me about the response you got to the OMR podcast interview. So that was one that we went to Hamburg, did the interview. I remember you saying afterwards that like, oh, I think it went well. I wasn't sure. I was a bit nervous. I think I messed up one or two answers. And my sense is afterwards that both you and everyone who heard it thought it was quite a powerful experience and interview. So I'd love to hear a bit about your kind of reflection on that, and also some of the conversations with the hundreds of people that have reached out that resonated with your message and sharing openly about your story.
Yeah, it's been definitely quite intense, the recording. I'm not someone that really prepares. I kind of really work with, okay, what's the life and in that moment, and then sharing that. So also it was only the second podcast I did at that time. So obviously still level of nervousness with that. I do have to say that the moment I was into it, it felt really funny. It felt really aligned to be sharing and to, simply not holding anything back. It was actually like it felt very free and felt really, really real in that moment. And I actually also deeply enjoyed that. So it was like a dance between nervousness, okay, can I say that? And then the desire to wanting to say it, and then saying it, and then feeling free about it, and then, oh shit, what I've done. And like, this was kind of like the dance in the thing. But yeah, overall, it was a great experience. And the feedback overall is great. I had hundreds of people actually reaching out, and many of them sharing their personal stories also. And as I said before, I thought like, consciously I knew that I'm not alone with these things, and at the same time I had the assumption, and then hearing similar stories from other people was also a great experience for me. And then seeing how people would open up and we would have a call and connect, that felt really great. That was really like connecting with lots of people afterwards. And seeing how, for me, it felt great to see how if I open up, then that creates space for others to open as well. And that's, I think, a place where healing can happen, and where behaviors can let go of and new behaviors can come into place. And that was great. And then there was obviously also some criticism, which I also understand in a certain way.
What kind of stuff?
So that the main thing, actually, there are two main things. One was that, I'd say there's three pieces actually I want to mention. So one is a notion that, okay, I'm a privileged, rich, white man, and I should not complain, basically, and I should not play victim in a certain way. Because I'm in a certain way saying, okay, I was overwhelmed, I was stressed, that's why I did all these behaviors, right? So in a certain way saying, I'm not allowed to share my experience. The other part was, and I also want to say that I do not buy into that story. Like,
I would imagine that was more people on the female orientation that was sharing that, or was it a general 50-50 thing?
No, it definitely wasn't a general 50-50 thing. Someone with the same experience wouldn't say that, right? So, no. I do not buy into that story, because I personally do believe like my experience is my experience, and unless I'm with me sharing my story, I'm actively, let's say, attacking or hurting someone, then there's absolutely no one is in the position to tell me not to share my story, because that's my experience, my personal experience, right? And that's my reality, and there's a right of free speech to share that. So anyways, that was one piece. The other piece was that, and that's where I actually want to say I want to take some responsibility for it, was to say, okay, I was especially financially, in a privileged kind of position, and I used these resources to get what I want from women and get it fast, especially sex. And with that, also consciously, say, participating in an industry that has lots of shadows.
Sure.
I don't want to say that this is all bad, because in the end, everyone is also making their own decisions. And I've seen many sides of that industry. And at the same time, yes, I want to take responsibility that I definitely use my resources to make use of the fact that there are women who didn't see another way to make an income than through selling her bodies. And today, with the knowledge that I have and the awareness, I'd say, yes, in a certain way, I've been contributing to hurt on a psychological level, like in a soul and body level in a certain way. So I want to take responsibility for the fact that I contributed to it, and it's not the relationship I want to have with the feminine. So yeah, that's fun. And at the same time, for me back then, I didn't have the level of awareness to act differently.
Yeah.
So seeing that, but also saying, I can't go back and change the past. So the past is what it is. So now if I'm not sharing and if I'm not speaking about it openly, I won't change my behavior going forward. So the only way of changing it is, for me, being transparent, honest, and open about it and sharing.
Yeah.
Right. And then a third thing was that was criticism was okay, I've contributed to, it was in the company, to a culture of working hard, faster, better, higher, and with that leading or creating a culture that would also make people run into burnouts. I would still say that many people had a good experience working for us. And yes, it's true that since I was completely stressed, I did not really focus on implementing systems that would prevent burnouts. And I actually even use the company as a tool for me to achieve what I wanted. And I would much rather, let's say, create pressure on the system, on the company, and push it as much as I've pushed myself. So I also want to, let's say, own that part. And at the same time, also, once again, saying this was who I was back then and what I could do. Yeah. So I accept that criticism. And I want to say, I'm still going to share what I have to say. Yeah. And but coming back to OMR, overall, I really liked the experience. And it made me realize I want to do more of that sharing, public speaking, and basically just in any moment, really showing myself as that who I am in that moment, bringing all aspects out. And in a certain way, even for me, it's a way to kind of destroy masks. I had it's the mask of I'm entrepreneur and I'm successful and I can take care of everything and everything is great and I do not have any shadows. So then I destroyed that mask publicly. Yeah. And then I felt a risk of, there's another mask of, no, I'm that great person that does everything right and has no bad behaviors and whatever, and no desires that are not welcome. And I feel the next step is to shatter that image once again. So the shit is still there. I have a new approach, but I might even go watch porn sometimes because I in the process of developing a new relationship to it. Yeah. And I really want to get out of the business of putting on masks. You know what I mean?
It's hard for people though, because they want to project you as the perfect guy now. So if you do that, then you'll shatter that image of the perfect guy. Yeah. The rags to riches, Yes. Sorry. Really interesting. Just a little, there's 2 points I have there. The first one was just a comment on the idea of pushing the system or the company, the same as within, so without, the same way you would push yourself. And I think recognizing that's an important thing for founders, that the parts of the car don't always have the same capacity as the engine, per se. Yeah. So if the engine has a capacity to go 300 miles an hour, maybe the wheels, maybe they're happier at 150. Yeah. And if the wheels have some, desire to actually also perform or please or believe they need to be a certain way, then they might actually end up burning themselves out of rubber. So I think that's important as a self-reflection piece for any entrepreneur, is how are the systems in your company, or the people in your company, how close is their capacity to push themselves, similar to yours? Yeah. But there's another one which I think you touched off kind of in point A and B there, which is about the privileged white male, and also the using your resources for the escorts, which both kind of pertain to a point which I would actually really like to kind of talk about and focus on, which is how, as a man, can you, because of course sharing the story is one way to bring light to these issues and to almost do it from a place of retrospection of like, this is who I was, this is what I did, and as a result, this is what I'm apologized for now, and this is what I want to do differently. And that can also maybe bring light to other people who might be in part one, you know, and don't know the way out. So I think naming that. But how does one deal with the potential for projections from anyone? In this case, it's women. You know, if they're saying you're a white man, you know, you should be kind of like, you shouldn't be allowed to talk about these things. To name and recognize that they're feeling some hurt or some pain, like you're saying, you're just sharing your story, and they are feeling some hurt and pain as a result.
Yeah.
And it may or may not be directly associated to something you said or did to them, but they're still feeling that. How would you like to go about in future being able to share that openly, but also kind of account for, even though you can't control how they're going to react, how would you like to account for that moving forward?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I would say two things. One is a practice of compassion for self, because it leads to compassion for others. So I can see where projections come from.
Sure.
And that enables me to respond from a grounded and centered way. Instead of like reacting to it, I can respond to it, right? And the other thing, honestly, is to continue doing my practice, especially doing breath work. Because what it does, it many times, it connects me to the core of my being. And that's not touched by these things. It's like, it's all stories and things and thoughts and blah, 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 but it is not what I am deep inside. So then I can sit in these projections, and I'm now saying that, let's see when there are more projections and more stories. Like the more I share and the deeper I share, the more potential there is for, you know, people to become triggered and then maybe react to it.
For sure.
But right now, if you ask me, okay, what's my best strategy to move into that? I'd say continue with the practice, compassion, doing more breath work, building that connection to my true core self, which is never touched by any of these things.
Yeah.
And that's the best preparation, I would say.
Yeah.
And then not react. Like whatever happens, not react. Look at it and then be with it and see how I want to deal with it, but not getting into reactions. So let's see if that works.
Yeah, it's interesting. Because like a lot of, there's an essay from, I think it's Mark Manson, about why you should never become famous. And it's this idea of like, actually the best outcome is to, you know, maybe have a business, sell it, no one really knows who you are, and you can have a nice lifestyle without ever needing to take the downsides. So after a brief intermission, courtesy of a very Bali-esque power cut, we are returning back after this little ad intermission that was unintentional. That was quite a funny experience where we were mid conversation and suddenly the power just goes and we're like, okay, do we just lose everything? But we're back online after maybe 45 minutes of hanging around outside. So ready to continue?
Yeah, let's do that.
Great. So we pick up where we left off. We were talking about, I was speaking about this Mark Manson essay about basically why you should never become famous. And this idea of like the more people that we're exposed to, or like the higher network, there's a higher percentage proportion of crazies that are more likely to then maybe want to stalk you or like project hate or whatever at you. Or, you know. So my question is like, for someone who's kind of done the thing where you've made some money and like had a little bit of, you know, success, maybe in some circles you'd be well known, but for the majority of people, they wouldn't really know who you are. Why is it now interesting and important for you to step more into the limelight in public speaking and sharing your story, which you know is potentially triggering for a lot of people, and it would be much easier to just kind of hang out in whatever house you decide to live in and, you know, and just have a nice existence? Why is that now important for you to do that?
I would say that in the past, public speaking wasn't something that I would really enjoy. It was actually quite difficult for me. I was extremely nervous and actually tried my very best to avoid that. Like from, let's say, 5 or 6 Christmas parties we had in the company, I avoided 5 of them, apart from one. To not having to be there and giving a speech, because I really fucking hated it. However, what has shifted now is so a few things. One is this speaking and sharing is a way for me to fully express myself. And I don't have to, let's say, come up with a story or come up with a message, because basically my experiences and the way I feel and what is there in the moment is my message and what I'm sharing.
Yeah.
And that is just a way of expressing. And I think I have a strong desire within me to let go of masks and to let go of ideas and stories about who I am and what I am and whatsoever, and to just bring out whatever is there in the moment. And yeah, I can only say that there's a true desire now to share, and it really touches my heart. I feel like when I'm doing that, I'm really connected and I'm in a flow and enjoy the process. And that is very different to my experience in the past when it came to public speaking. And also, I would say I personally have, in a way, suffered so much from having so many stories about myself and having all these personas and masks that now it's really a process of personal liberation to shatter and destroy them. And the best way of doing it is by just being very open and very honest and very raw.
Exposing them to the light.
Exactly. And this just feels, for sure, sometimes edgy, because I'm not free of the fear of judgment or anything. I'm still a human being, and if I receive feedback like, "Oh, you shouldn't be like that," or "What have you done?" and for sure it can trigger me, and I'm also, part of me is afraid of that. But then the reward of just sharing without even, the feedback is a great add-on, and I loved the feedback from the Home podcast. Was insanely grateful for all the nice messages I got. It's a nice add-on. The experience of bringing everything out is already what the reward for me. So I think what I realized is the moment I have something that's important for me, then I can really enjoy the experience. And that was different in the past. I kind of had to make up a story like, we as a company are here and we want to get there for X, Y, Z reason. And that was always like, I need to be in my mind and very focused and concentrated, and then come up with the stuff. Now I just come in, I share, I feel into it, and I express, and that feels just great. So I think it has really to do with the importance of the message and how does the process feel for me, which does not mean that I am not nervous before recording, or if I at some point maybe also speak on stages, I'll for sure be nervous and everything, but it's so important and liberating to me. I really want that.
Nice. And I think there's something in that as well around the, as you said, shedding of personas and masks. And you mentioned in the past that, there was certain roles that you were comfortable playing or that maybe you believed you needed to play. So what were some of the roles that you were very comfortable in the past, or that would have been how you unconsciously defined yourself? And then what are some of the more recent ones that you've been able to poke at or put your finger on? In terms of like, I am this person.
So I would say a big one was, I am the successful entrepreneur that has everything under control. I am that person that is not very emotional, let's say, and wouldn't express openly. I'd say the strongest one were about like, I am successful through the lens of business. Another one would be I'm capable of handling everything. So there's no room for failure, actually. Failure is not the right word, sorry. There's no room for weakness and I don't have capacity for that, I'm sorry. And these are probably the main ones that come to mind.
And nowadays, then, what are some of the ones you're dancing with, or along in the past 2 years?
At some point there was another one which was like, I'm, let's say that very, very fit, very healthy person. So I would only eat clean and develop like a very well-defined physique. Then it's definitely an element of, okay, now I'm that person that has done all the bad stuff and now doing only good things. There are no shadows anymore. Free of all desire Another big one is I'm a spiritual person. Like, I don't need to deal with the messiness of the human experience. I can just
Transcend
it all from one day to another. Yeah, these were a few ones that came up recently. Especially, I would say the biggest one is this. Yeah, I know this, let's say, fully conscious, aware man that's fully stepped into his masculine power and is like not that old version anymore. And
I think like tying yourself to these kinds of identities can have benefits, but ultimately if it becomes shadowy, that's when we start to repress parts of ourselves because they don't fit in to this nice, archetype or avatar.
Yeah.
And then that's when, as you said, the rebound happens.
Yeah. I think a good way of noticing that for me is whenever I think, I should do this or that, that's a good sign for I'm actually keeping up a certain image about myself or want to portray something.
Yes.
And as you said, like, there's nothing wrong with leaning into different versions of myself, but more in the sense of, I want to experience something in this way and want to experiment with it.
Yeah.
Then the problem is the moment I'm identified with, that's who I am. Mm-hmm. So actually the moment I can give a very precise description of who I am, I probably already have a problem.
Yes.
Because it's going to be tough to keep that up. And what I find really enjoyable and very free is to just work with what is there.
Yeah.
And even if it's something that does not match that image. So, or another one was like, that I had recently was like, I'm this very conscious investor that has this new way of investing into companies. And honestly, a part of me is still very greedy. And a part of me wants money and wants to have more money to feel safe and wants to spend it. And sometimes wants to do something that's maybe not reasonable. And is kind of, sorry, I'm lacking the word, but like people will look at it and say, hey, that's like, if you had, like, that's a fucking waste of money. Why would you do that? Something like it's in the realm of luxury or whatever.
Yeah.
And I'm realizing though, I want to do business in a different way. And there's a part of me that wants to make a good return,
Totally.
And I think that's, for me, it's a process really of recognizing another image, shadowing it, let going of it, and constantly being in that process is, for me, right now that I'm feeling into it, even like a new definition of freedom.
Yeah.
So it's, my definition of freedom is kind of evolving, and I'm seeing like, letting go of these personas, constantly letting go of them every time, again and again and again, and that's kind of the process for me right now.
What would you say to someone who very much identifies with, given our kind of audience, like someone who very much identifies as a business person or entrepreneur, and they know that that's what they would refer to themselves as, and maybe they have or haven't identified some of the shadows of only identifying as that, or being a hard worker, or being the one who's always available, or what are some ways that one could start to notice and therefore dissolve these personas? And what are some of the benefits of that then?
From my point of view, what I needed back then, and I would assume that's true for many, let's say, entrepreneurs, high performers, overachievers, whatever you want to call them, is an experience. I can read a book about personas, I can read whatever, Carl Jung or whatever I want to read, and I understand the concepts and everything, and there are shadows and blah, blah, blah. But then a system that is trained in such a way and that is sometimes even so rigid needs an experience to break through that. And these experiences can, obviously it's breath work, because that what helped me a lot. I believe it's also available in meditation. It's also available through plant medicine. There are different ways of like really breaking through that once and then knowing, there's something else. And with that knowledge, then starting then to work with that and finding ways of integrating that into daily life.
Yeah.
So I would always recommend to go for an experience. Yeah. I think that's the best way to, step out of that.
Yeah.
Not only if stay in the mind and just do only mind-based coaching or reading or whatever. It's a system like mine needed experience, and I still need experience.
Yeah.
I still put up an image then I experience it. Fuck, that's not who I am. Okay, great.
Yeah.
And I can let go of it.
Yeah.
Because I can only let go of stuff that I have experienced that I am not.
Yeah.
As long as I am something, I can't let go of it, because that's kind of an ego death, and I don't have the capacity to die, to be my own death. That's it won't work. So
it's funny. I think, the idea when you say experience, like I see obviously some kind of altered state is a good way. It's basically a way to get out of your programming, whatever the modus operandi is of like how one is day to day.
Yeah.
Whether that's like dropping into an altered state through these different things you've mentioned, or going somewhere that's completely different. And like what we do in the retreats, for instance, is having a chance to really look at and reflect on all these different ways that we show up and the patterns that we have, and being able to see that from almost like a completely removed perspective is a great way, I think, as well, to kind of notice the areas in our life that we're living almost like we're looking down on our lives from 10,000 feet in a way, So obviously we're big components, or proponents of breath work. It's kind of the basis of our business, and it would be very easy for us to sit here and just say breath work is the only way and the only thing you should ever do ever. What I would say is, like, not to dump on our number one kind of offering, but I'd say that's kind of like the driving license for me.
Yeah,
it's like that was the thing for me that really took me from being in my head to in my body. And opening the doors to my capacity to feel things, to feel emotions, to welcome parts of me, and to really work through a lot of this stuff on an ongoing basis. But once I got my driving license, then I could drive wherever I wanted. I could have all sorts of, experiences around the world. So, I've had mine, but what have been, let's say, the 3 most powerful experiences you've had since getting your breathwork driving license?
I'd say one was Iboga. Iboga is like a plant medicine from Africa.
Yeah.
Really intense, very long journey. It takes you basically out of the head, probably for like, in my case, like almost 30 hours. It's pretty wild, pretty extreme. And I was very happy that I did breathwork before, because it helped me to navigate that experience. And I have no idea what would have happened if I, wouldn't have done breathwork before. So definitely Iboga.
I think you mentioned something about that, about like other people vomiting, and then you being able to like almost bypass the vomiting by being able to surrender.
Yeah, totally. That is a big thing. I realized that in all these experiences, the most profound impact is the moment where I even like disassociate from self. And there's big resistance usually to this. So let's say the medicine wants me to disassociate from self, and then there's a big resistance to do that, because that's on a certain level, that's death, that doesn't mean that it needs to be a death experience, death-like experience in terms of visuals or whatever, but the dissociation from self is completely not safe for the self, obviously, right? Because what is then left? It's pure awareness, but that's a different topic.
That's for chapter 3.
Yeah, and like, so surrendering to an experience is what I learned in the breathwork journeys. But then I could apply that in the experience with the Iboga and that very, very long thing, and could simply fully surrender and relax into the experience. And then there was no resistance. I mean, there's no resistance. The body was relaxed and didn't have to throw up, because it wasn't resisting the medicine, but it was working with it. And I checked in with people, like they were, basically resisting what happened, and then through the resistance there's tension, and tension needs to go somewhere, and then there's vomiting or something else, So definitely Iboga, I'd say. Then I would also say retreats. I had like a very good one. It was a short one, only for like 2 days, but roughly 2 months ago here on Bali as well. Work around, let's say, some tantric elements basically, and man's work. It was and on there, once again, like, the experiences were massive challenge for my ego that had all these images about myself, but then I had learned to surrender to something, because I know I'm going to come out alive on the other end. And with that, I was able to relax into things that wouldn't have been available for me even like a year ago, like, or maybe 2 years ago, like completely not safe for my self-image and for my ego. And then having the capacity to surrender to an experience helped me to actually go through that, and it was one of the best experiences I had in the past few months.
It's kind of like being on a roller coaster. You know, you can get on the roller coaster and like just like let go and enjoy the ride, knowing that you're going to get off on the other side, or you can grip on and be traumatized on the other side.
Exactly. Totally. Exactly like that. And then another thing I would say is, okay, now I need to choose. So I'm going to choose meditation, Zen meditation.
Yeah.
Massively supported as well through breathwork. Sounds like advertising right now, but reality is like,
Buy our product.
The reality for me is like, breathwork gives me the ability to self-regulate.
Yeah.
And then it's much easier for me to sit with myself and sit with all the shit that comes up, and sit in it and actually make contact with what's actually underneath all of these stories that come up when I'm just by myself sitting and in stillness, and there's nothing else, no distraction or nothing, and I'm actually sitting with the question like, who the fuck am I? And there's no answer coming anymore, and there's just nothingness. So then if my nervous system knows that, or has the capacity to regulate, then it's not gonna go crazy and bring up all sorts of things that then will destroy my meditation experience. So I can clearly say that breathwork supported that, and at the same time having a strong meditation routine, in my case it's Zen, is extremely helpful for me.
Totally.
And it's a chance of making that experience of no self, so to say, again and again, basically sometimes even available on a daily basis. So.
I think if our body is stuck in a high tone fight or flight state, like always on, then switching off or moving down into the parasympathetic state, which is basically what most meditations will bring us to, feels quite uncomfortable if we've been conditioned to live up here all the time. So I think the monkey mind that people often speak to with regard to meditation is more just the mind creating a avoidance of dropping into that parasympathetic state. So it finds ways to keep us activated with thoughts, or I need to do this, or I need to do that. And we can attribute it to some kind of like, you know, self or ego, whatever. What I've found is that when the body feels comfortable to drop down to that deep rest, which is what, you know, a lot of meditation can bring us to, then there doesn't need to be the distractions of the mind because it doesn't feel safe to go there.
Yeah.
You know, so I think that's another benefit as well of any form of practice that regulates the nervous system on a deeper level.
Yeah. Agree. Yeah.
You spoke about an ego death before, and I know that probably one that you won't get to talk about very often, or maybe in the future you'll bring it more in, but is this idea of death. And I know that that's something that's kind of close to your heart in a way. Yeah. That sounds right. But since I've known you, there's been different, like from talking about like the first homeless guy in the street that you went and spoke with, or, you know, and then how that's developed. I'd love to hear a bit more about your exploration of grief or of death, and why is it in your eyes that society doesn't want to look at this, even though it's something that's very much there at every street corner for all of us?
So I would say for me personally, maybe to put things in context, like I spent a couple of months working at a hospice.
Which for context is where people go to die, basically.
Yeah, exactly. People like in the final stages of a disease, that we would go there and then be prepared to die at some point, and typically like 4 to 6 weeks, but some people even like stay for much longer. And there is a quality in before I go there, like this question of, okay, what actually happens when I die has been on my mind for ever, actually. And I had many moments, even like before I went on this path of changing things and, you know, developing a sense for spirituality. Even then I had many moments sometimes where I was like, okay, I'm doing all of these things, but eventually I will die and everyone I love will die. So like, what's
the fucking point?
There's no meaning here in that. Why even bother or care?
Yeah.
And the downside of the thoughts, it can make me feel quite depressed, because then doesn't make sense. Doesn't even make sense to get up if I'm gonna die anyways, right? And at the same time, the potential of going into that is it connects me with something bigger, something deeper that actually makes me then be quite alive.
Yeah.
It's almost like confronting the inevitable that is, where I'm deeply afraid of. But then by facing it, I develop a relationship to it rather than constantly running away from it.
Yeah.
And that what drew me to the work of being in the hospice and being surrounded by people who are about to face a death, and to just share space with them and do a bit of space holding and talking. Like, didn't do anything special there, I would say. It's really just about sharing time, space, and being there, basically. And also, seeing how the final stages of death can look like. Actually, it's not right. The final stages of being alive. And for me, it's really a way of, I'd even say, connecting to God in a certain way, as I'm not likely believing in the way of, let's say, in a Christian way of like God is defined, but to whatever that is, where all of this comes from that we are experiencing, right? And the same goes a bit with grief. Like, I do have like days where I would just get up and have an immense feeling of grief and sadness, and one could call it depression, whatever it is. Anyways, it's just there. And what I realized over time is like, I was a little bit of a journey of like, oh, that thing is there, let's completely avoid it through escape mechanisms, to like healthier escape mechanisms. Like, oh, I'm feeling like shit, okay, let's do breath work, and then stuff will move, and then I feel better, which is great. It's perfect. And I would even say that, because I really want to say also that if for whatever reason I need medicine to move through that, like real medicine, not plant medicine, that's also welcome. And then I think there's a potential to just meet that grief without anything, just meeting with my awareness and see, okay, why are you here? What's the message that you have for me? And just being with it. And it's hard to explain it. It's not like a real process of something doing. It's more like being aware and allowing the grief to be there and sitting in it. And sometimes it moves then through my system, and then there's some expression of it. It could be some tears or whatever, sadness, could even be anger at sometimes. And in the end, I believe like everything is there for a certain reason. And if I have the capacity to meet it and to look into it, then it's a great opportunity. So I also want to say that it's, I think for everyone that can relate to that, I think one will feel that if there's a right point of time to do that. And it's nothing wrong with avoiding these states, completely nothing wrong with it. But I do feel I have the capacity now, so I'm kind of starting to get into that and to allowing it to be there rather than pushing it away. And the reason why I would think that society is kind of, when it comes to these topics, death or grief or whatever, kind of like more avoiding it, it's highly uncomfortable. And my nervous system definitely wasn't trained to deal with it. But then if that is extremely uncomfortable, and if that induces fear and anxiety, and then there's, let's say, easy ways out, then I will take them. But I'm also missing the potential of getting closer to myself and realizing that I'm actually way more than all of these little stories that I told about me. So for me, it's a way to directly connect with the essence of life, which sometimes I feel, and sometimes I wish I wouldn't have gone into it. So,
once you open the box, you can't go back.
Exactly. Exactly.
When you were speaking there, I was kind of having this this reflection of, death being the ultimate glass half full, glass half empty. Like, we're going to have dinner afterwards, and like I can choose the chicken or the steak, and then whichever one I don't choose is the opportunity cost, and I could get sad about that, or I could enjoy what I'm eating. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I'm going to die is like, I can be depressed for the rest of my life because I'm going to die, or I'm going to die can actually be the spark that makes me truly live.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
So it's really like the ultimate kind of both ends of the spectrum, because that's like mild disappointment or slight appreciation of the steak versus like full depression or bliss and joy, you know?
Yeah. That makes sense. Yeah.
So very interesting polarization on that topic.
Yeah.
But I totally agree as well about this idea of like, if my system doesn't feel safe to handle, like if I've learned that, for instance, sadness or grief isn't welcome, like I go to a funeral and no one talks and they just get shit-faced, and no one actually says or expresses anything worthwhile, then I'll learn that that's not okay, and actually it's better to be the strong one who doesn't show any emotion. So that when a topic that triggers the natural emotion of grief in me is presented, even if you're listening to this and you're going, oh, this is fucking edgy, I think I'm going to turn this off and listen to, you know, some music or something instead. It's like just noticing that part that wants to not go there and just breathing into that. Just being like it's all good. It's here, and it's also welcome as part of the family.
Yeah.
And then it's just a practice of continuing to do that, you know?
Totally. Yeah. Yeah, I guess there's also like a part of me that, it's hard to explain it in a way, but things that appear to be edgy through the lens of society, or the lens that I had for many years. Like, for example, being with people who die, or practicing true compassion, for example, is something that deeply interests me, because in a certain way I still believe like freedom is also not having to look at life through the lens of society. So everything that appears to be edgy or not looked at is actually, for me, something that is deeply inspiring and interesting, because it's for me an expression of freedom in a certain way.
Very interesting. To be continued, to be explored.
Totally. It's an ongoing process, and you know, even if you ask me in 4 weeks, I would probably have to share more about that. So and just to finish that, I would say like true spiritual practice requires a meeting with death and a conscious kind of a relationship to it. And that does not mean I have to overcome the fear of death. The fear is the death is completely not safe for the ego and for the self and for the I and my definition about myself. So any fear, whatever, is perfectly right and welcome. And it is the end of that I and of that stories about I have about myself. Then the inquiry can be, okay, but what actually happens there and who actually dies, which is, by the way, a great book of an author that I'm a big fan of. So whoever is interested in that topic, I would really recommend reading Who Dies from Stephen Devine. Very inspiring.
I feel like you're going to put him back on the map.
Yes. Yeah. Anyways, final words on that topic.
Yeah, it's very interesting. Like observing from afar my like grandmother passing away in her 90s and seeing like the level of just deep fear that was in her. And like in many ways she was very loving and very positive, but there was just this deep-seated fear. And I saw how right up in like in her final years and then right to the end, how it really like she was gripping so hard but didn't know any other way. It was so deeply conditioned. And recently my mom was here in Bali and for 3 weeks, and I was kind of, you know, showing her around, and she was having all similar fears come up, from fear of a spider or a dog, you know, and this kind of thing, or like what's going to happen with a wound if it gets infected, down the rabbit hole. And I'm like, this is the training ground now to face those fears and show your system that you're going to be okay, so that later on when you don't have the capacity, it doesn't overwhelm you, so that whatever comes, you can just surrender to it, basically. Just be like, okay, this is where we're at, but like, I'm good, you know? I think that's the ultimate freedom.
Oh yeah. Totally.
Shout out to all the entrepreneurs wanting freedom. Amazing. Well, I think that's a pretty nice place to close this out. Just finish on a light note, you know.
Yeah, very light.
There's many more other things we could talk about, obviously, but I think after our power outage, which took shaved a bit of time off, it means we might have to do a part 3 very soon.
Let's do
But
that.
this has been great. And have you any final words for the listeners? Maybe, you know, a message you'd like to share?
I'd say my message would be that if there's only, like whoever's listening, if there's only a tiny little bit of a calling, so to say, to find out what else is there to life than the known, it's just a little bit of a calling for what's actually else, what else is there, what's the unknown. Keep following that. It's highly uncomfortable and it's totally worth it.
It'll probably bring you to some pretty weird ceremony things in some spiritual places around the world. But if it's not a great experience, it's a great lesson. That's what I like to think. So.
Yes. And just keep exploring. Yeah, I think I would encourage everyone to. And yeah, I agree. You'll probably at some point end up here in Bali, Costa Rica, some other of these places and doing some weird stuff. But yeah. It's worth it.
It's all part of the journey.
Yeah.
We'll keep enjoying yours.
Thank you.
And thanks for joining me again today. And
thanks for having me.
Looking forward to the next one.
Yeah, let's do that. Thank you.
You're welcome.